Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning into this recording. My name is Matt Cardwell. I'm Vice President of Client Services at Intelligent Medical Objects, a healthcare data quality and enablement company and market leader in medical terminology solutions. I'm joined today by Dr. Steve Labkoff, the Chief Data Officer at the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, or MMRF for short, a leading cancer nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating a cure for multiple myeloma. IMO and the MMRF have recently started working together to further improve the utility of the clinical data from the MMRF Cure Cloud and Compass clinical trials. Steve, I'd like to start by asking you to explain a little bit more about the MMRF. What does the organization do?
Sure, thanks, Matt, and thanks for having me. The MMRF, being a research organization, is focused in on trying to find a cure for every patient with myeloma. And to accomplish that, they've embarked on a personalized medicine technique, or at least trajectory, for accomplishing that goal. So the MMRF realized several years ago in the course of its Compass study that what really matters in the course of researching how myeloma patients move through this journey, it's really all about the data and understanding how the data is generated from multiple sources, and then being able to stitch all that data together into one overarching system really makes the ability for other researchers to take our data and leverage it looking for new cures. As an example, when Compass was stood up, it's been responsible for figuring out that not only is myeloma not one disease, it actually may be as many as 12 different diseases with 12 different genomic subtypes of the disease present in cases in the Compass study. It's insights like that which then are helping researchers to identify new targets for medications and new ways for patients to be given the medication that may well be more appropriate to their particular subtype of myeloma.
Wow. Now, those are incredible insights. Can you tell me a little bit about the role that data quality plays in the value that you deliver to your clients and patients alike?
Sure. So the quality of our data really obviously matters. If you're going to be making decisions on what therapies to take or what clinical trial to be enrolled in, or how to proceed your journey if you've got a fork in the road going left or right, the quality of the information that is there matters, and it matters tremendously. Getting the right information about what's happened in the patient's clinical history really does matter. So understanding the nuances of what clinicians might have intended for a therapy or a drug or a combination of drugs is critically important in decision making by others upstream or downstream in the system, so that good decision making can happen.
Is there a biggest challenge that you would cite around data quality?
Well, I don't know if it's the biggest challenge in data quality, but I think one of the issues is that from a data quality perspective, until very recently, on the clinical side, because we actually study multiple data types, including genomics and immunologics, but on the clinical data side, getting data from electronic medical records, despite all the investments in the US in medical record deployment, has been extraordinarily challenging. And it's challenging on a lot of levels, not the least of which is, despite having the right permissions from patients and consents, many of the institutions don't release data to non-patients, especially those who are doing research studies not at their institution. But more importantly, when it comes to the data quality pieces, is that because of the differences in electronic medical records across the US, getting information that means the same thing across different data ingestions matters. And it's not always a foregone conclusion that a diagnosis or a drug name is necessarily conserved to the same degree of precision that you might think. And that's really been an ongoing challenge for this and many organizations, not just the MMRF, over time. Being able to harmonize data from multiple systems is really one of the largest challenges when it comes to getting clinical data aggregated together.
So can you unpack how you've been approaching that issue today? Just, I mean, short of the privacy issues, data access, once you have the data,
Right.
what's the approach you've taken so far?
So the approach that we've taken up to this point in time has been, we've had to hire an external organization to manually, for the most part, go through medical records and abstract out the clinical data. And the challenge with that is the following. Most of the medical record systems, when they're requested to provide an export of the medical record, tend to export a human readable file, generally as a PDF. The problem with that PDF is many of the metadata codes, such as LOINC and CPT and ICD-10 and others, are stripped from these medical record abstraction. Basically, they're like digital offprints. And because the data is stripped, the clinical intention of what some of this stuff is meant to mean is lost. Now, one of the interesting things, and I've come to learn over my time, is that, and this is why IMO and the MMRF are working together, is that IMO plays a very interesting role in the healthcare data ecosystem, in that it's embedded in probably what, Matt, 85% or more of the electronic health record systems across the US. And because of that, many of the textual strings that are mated with these concept codes and other terminologies are actually embedded into the record, which means that even though the codes may not be there, because you can actually do a one-to-one match on the text strings, you can actually re-encode some of this clinical data back to the terminologies that were intended. And you could recolorize the data if you have the right tools. And luckily for us, IMO recently released one such tool that allows us to do just that. And we don't need the sophistication of that matching in every instance, but in many of the instances it's extremely helpful to be able to get back to what the clinicians actually intended versus what an abstractor thinks they intended. And that helps us with precision on the diagnoses. It helps us with precision in a lot of the, in having these codes added back or recolorized into the system, into our system.
No, that's great. It's certainly exciting to be at the front end of this partnership. And I know early days so far, Steve, but have you and your team seen anything worth commenting on already along those lines?
Sure. So as you said, it is early days. We've at this point run, so the Cure Cloud program, and we've worked with IMO on that. We're going to start working with the Compass program very shortly as well. Compass is sort of at the twilight of its existence. It's been running since 2011. Sorry, I say Compass? Compass is running since 2011. And Cure Cloud is just basically coming online as of July of last year. So we've been concentrating on getting all this right for for Cure Cloud. But we'll be encoding the Compass data as well over the next 6 to 8 months to ensure that both sets have this level of sophistication added into it. But for what we have to date in Cure Cloud, so far we've only run 163 cases. That's all the cases that have come back from the clinical abstraction company that we partnered with to date. And we've run all of those cases through the IMO system. And we've been really pleased with the level of clinical precision that seems to be coming back. And what's nice is that IMO provides us not just with the codes, but with what it considers a confidence percentage in terms of how confident it is that these codes match. And the confidence percentages range from, I don't know, sub 60% to over 90%. And just as a clinician myself, I've been looking over for data quality as we've been receiving the material back in, and even where IMO's confidence is on the lower side, on the in the 60s or so, many of the codes that it has picked and has added back from a clinician's perspective look right. And I'm not at a point now where I could declare it's perfect. I don't know that we ever would be there, but it's certainly better than having no codes, which is where we were until very recently. And
right.
And actually just next week, we're going to be getting another 100 or so, maybe more than 100 cases back from our abstraction company. And we'll be able to do this yet again and run it again. And at that point, we're going to have enough data to start doing some really interesting work. At that point, we'll have probably just shy of 250 cases, and they'll be matched with the clinical genomic panel that we're running with it. as well as some patient donated data. So we'll be able to really start doing some really good, meaty, beefy analyses. We can start bringing some of our other analytics tools to bear on the data set.
Yeah, can you unpack that a little bit more for me? I'm sure that slicing, dicing these data sets, generating patient cohorts improves, but paint a picture for me. You didn't have standard codes before, now you do. What does that unlock?
So in theory, and we'll know soon, it should be unlocking the ability to get much more specific cohorts. So, as an example, if we're looking for a specific adverse event, let's say, in the data, we have an adverse event table. That adverse event table looks an awful lot like a problem list. It's full of different medical diagnoses of the various adverse events that occur when you take chemotherapeutic agents from, in the course of a myeloma or not treatment round. We'll be able to get far more specific about what those diagnoses are and be able to generate more specific types of queries on that. And it's not just in adverse events. Anywhere we have problem lists or medical diagnoses or drug names, it'll help us get more precise. It'll also help us with, this is yet to be proven, but I think it'll help us with some of the challenges we've been having with things like line of therapy determination, as well as medical regimen determination. So right now, that's been a bit of a thorn in our sides. This is not an MMRF specific problem. It's a problem in informatics, which is that when you're doing, in the oncology space, when you're trying to understand computationally what it means to be on a triplet therapy or a quad therapy, because of the real world implications of what that means. In other words, you might be on 4 drugs, but one might drop because of an adverse event or a non-tolerability, but that still doesn't mean you're not on that regimen per se. So being able to determine what medical regimen you're on, I'm thinking will be a little easier for us to do computationally when we have diagnostic codes versus textual drug names. Check back with us in 3 or 6 months, and we'll be able to give you a better determination on if that's proven to be the case. But I think it will be.
No, that's extremely exciting to think about some of the tangible outcomes of what data means to patients, loved ones, all those that you're working with and serving.
Let me add something else, Matt, which is that the Cure Cloud isn't just about clinical data. It's about bringing together data sets from multiple perspectives. We have data that's coming in from a brand new genomics panel. And ordinarily, like we did with Compass, we could just analyze the panel results and have a series of 70 different genes and all the positives and negatives, whether they're appearing in the patient's genome or not, or in the panel or not. But that would only give you what it looks like genomically. What's really helpful here is that if we find a genomic finding of one type or another, we can then, because of all this, these linkages, we can go back and find the clinical data that matches, and then we'll have on the clinical side more precise information, and maybe hopefully be able to understand at a more granular level, what these different groups look like. At the end of the day, the objective is to find out how the differences in genome match up with the differences in their patient's journey, and hopefully see if there's some finding that aligns the genomic findings with the clinical findings. And later on in 2021 and into 22, we're going to be doing immunoprofiling of these same patients, and the same thing will be possible, but now not just against the clinical data and the genomic data, but now we'll bring in the immunologic data as well. And long into the rest of this year as well, we'll be bringing in patient-reported outcome data into the Cure Cloud. So we'll have yet another ability to do this. Now, not all those are coded with IMO terminology codes, to be clear, because those terminology codes don't apply in genomic and immunologic data sets. But because we'll have a better view and more precision on the clinical side, it should help us get to a better answer in the clinical data once all these different analyses have been able to take place. Right now, we're mostly in the recruiting phase of this program, trying to get as many patients into the system as we can. As I said, we launched July 20th of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. And as of now, we are just short of 600 patients who are currently enrolled into the system. So, we're running at a good clip, roughly 50 to 55 patients a month. And maybe another 6 months, we'll have a big enough cohort of patient data back through the pipelines that this work will be able to commence.
That's outstanding progress. What's the impact of what we're doing together on your team, Steve?
Well, the ultimate impact, I think, is going to be yet to be determined when we start to do some of these deeper analyses. But what it's going to do for our analytics partners, which include academic medical centers and life science organizations, the researchers who are diving deep on this information are going to have a much easier time in doing cohort generation. They'll be able to understand and query the data far more easily, because they'll be able to group things by, ICD-10 code versus text words in the data. And the reason why that's important is that, if somebody on the abstraction team misspells a word or, adds an extra hyphen, the Perl scripts or the Python scripts or the R code that has to get written has to take all those things into account. But if it's a diagnostic code, it's sort of like barcoding the data in many regards, except instead of a barcode, it's a physical numeric or an alphanumeric code that gets used for this purpose. And that makes it far, far easier computationally to manipulate and work with the data.
Well, it's truly exciting what you're working on there at the MMRF, Steve. At least for right now, I think that wraps up my questions for today. It's been a great discussion as always. Thanks so much for your time. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of our listeners that we're excited to stay close to your progress as we make deriving valuable insights from clinical data possible together.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, IMO.